Welcome to Talking with the Animals, an exploration of animal communication. Join animal communicator, craniosacral therapist, and NES practitioner Caroline Pope as she discusses how to understand other species as they truly are, not just from the human perspective. That's right, Mecco. Discover how communicating with our four-legged friends can open up a whole new world for both of you. And now, your host and Australia's most recognized and well-known animal communicator, Caroline Pope.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking with the Animals. I'm your host, Caroline Pope. Thank you for joining me. Today's episode's going to be a little bit different. I'm delighted to have author extraordinaire, art historian, ex-vet, and let's not forget the most important part, my champ and my magical unicorns, fairy godmother, Katherine Kovacic here. We're discussing animals in art and basically Kath's literary career. And if you haven't read her books, I will list them in the notes. Please jump online and have a look at them. They are fabulous from a totally unbiased point of view, of course. And now, here's Kath.
Hi, Caroline. Great to join you on the podcast today.
Thank you. So, Kath, I've got to ask, how on earth did you go from a working veterinarian to an art historian to an author? I mean, it's not exactly your usual job transference, shall we say?
Right. Well, this is sort of the how long have you got kind of answer. But first of all, going from a vet to an art historian, it was going to be 6 months off from vet work to work in the family business to help out because I worked in that business all through school and I knew it back to front and needed help. So 6 months became 3 years. And during that time, I took a couple of art subjects at Melbourne Uni, just like because you could do it without sort of having to do assessment and stuff, just for interest's sake, because I'd always done science. And it was really interesting. And so while still working in the family business, I did some, night study and I got my master's and then my PhD in art history. And what was really interesting for me in art was the way animals were portrayed in art. So that was what sort of got me onto that one. And I don't know about, then going to an author, that's probably a whole other story that is probably not so relevant to animals. So we'll leave the whole author thing aside. It kind of fell on from the art history thing though.
Okay, well, we'll certainly get to the author in a minute because there's Hogarth, the wonderful wolfhound in your Alex Clayton books, and there was a Labrador, I believe, in Seven Sisters. But what part of animals in art were you specifically interested in, and how did that interest all kick up?
Well, what really interested me at first was the human-animal bond, the depiction of animals and people together and the way they interact on the canvas. And I think I was also really interested because art historians, from what I was reading at the time, tended not to be animal people, so they wouldn't know what breeds they were looking at, and they'd also have lots of sort of allegorical and really interesting ways to explain what the animal was supposed to mean in the painting. The dog was there as a sign of valour, or conversely, the dog was there as a sign of sexual lasciviousness. I don't know how they quite add up together, but it kind of annoyed me as a vet and an animal person that all these dogs and cats and other animals were kind of getting this really weird art historical rap when really, for me, I could see that sometimes those animals were there because the artist just wanted them there and sometimes the people wanted them there. If it's a portrait of a human and an animal, the person wanted their pet dog or cat or whatever in the picture rather than it necessarily representing something. And one of the examples that particularly comes to mind is a lovely portrait, Renaissance portrait of Cosimo de' Medici. No, not Cosimo Medici, Lorenzo Gonzaga in the Prado Museum, and he's got a small white fluffy dog with him, what we would call a Bolognese today. And there's all this stuff about how he was trying to marry some new woman after getting rid of his last wife, and the white dog is supposed to represent his purity and his good prospects and all the valorous things that he's going to bring to this new marriage. But what they don't tell you is that the Gonzaga family actually bred Bolognese dogs, and to me that's a lot more relevant and a lot more of a reason to have the dog in the picture than any potential marriage prospects that he was trying to conjure up. So those were the sort of things that got me really into art and looking at how animals were portrayed.
Oh, that's gold. Human nature really does not change, does it? And yeah, animals in art, animals in animal communication, so much of it, unfortunately, is what the animals represent to the people or about the people's involvement with them rather than the actual animal itself. Can you list for me, Kath, all the books you've done, both fiction, non-fiction, and those in art, please?
Yeah, sure, Caroline. First of all, I'm going to say, sorry I dropped the Medici name in there, but the thing is that the Medicis also bred little Bolognese dogs, so that's where the confusion comes from me because they appear in those paintings too. In terms of books, I've done quite a lot of art catalogues or contributed to them, but the actual book started with the Alex Clayton series. So that's my art historian Sleuth with her dog Hogarth by her side. The first is The Portrait of Molly Dean. The second is Painting in the Shadows. And the third is The Shifting Landscape. Then there is the historical true crime, The Schoolgirl Strangler. There is the TV to book adaptation of the Ms. Fisher's murder mysteries called Just Murdered. There is my latest crime thriller, Seven Sisters, which you mentioned has a Labrador in it. And there is also just recently published a non-fiction book, Historical Photographs of Dogs called Australia's Dogs.
Quite a collection. And I'm sorry, Kath, but I am going to do this to you. Can you please explain to our listeners the legend of the polar bear in Painting in the Shadows? That is one of my all-time favourites. The polar bear made me do it.
Oh, I know how much you love that one, Caroline. So in Painting in the Shadows, I reference an actual painting by the artist Sir Edwin Landseer, and it has the very doom and gloom title, Man Proposes, God Disposes. And what it relates to is a failed expedition to find the Northwest Passage in the Arctic, and that was under the auspices of Captain Franklin. And in fact, 149 people disappeared in the Arctic, never to be seen again. Various search parties were sent out. They found some relics, nothing much. And it was this huge thing in England and in America, but particularly in England in the 1850s and 1860s. And Edwin Landseer painted his interpretation of this painting, of the events. But what he did was he painted two polar bears with a wrecked lifeboat and relics around it, and the polar bears are sort of gnawing on ribs and things. And this is a bit of a subtle reference because there was lots of suggestion that perhaps the party had descended into cannibalism before they'd all died. So that was the hot rumour, wildly denied by Lady Jane Franklin, the captain's wife, obviously. And so this was it was amazing when this painting went up on display at the annual exhibition in England. The painting was subsequently bought by a ladies' college, and it hung for many years in their gallery. And the gallery was then turned into an exam room in the 20th century. But the thing is that one year a student freaked out about the painting, couldn't do the exam sitting next to it. It was horrible. It was too frightening, couldn't do the exam. And someone ran out, they wanted to run the exam, so someone ran out and grabbed a Union Jack and covered the painting because it was the only thing big enough to cover this massive painting, hid the painting with the flag, and the exam went on. But then all these rumours started to spring up about what happened if you looked at the painting while you were doing your exam. Did you go mad? Did you gouge your eyes out? Did you write over and over again on the exam, the polar bears made me do it, and then run out of the exam room and kill yourself? So there's this whole horrifying freak show thing going on about the cursed painting. And even to this day at Holloway College in England, where the painting still hangs, that painting is covered by the Union Jack every year when they sit exams in that room because students still freak out.
Love it. You can see, everyone, why that's one of my favourites. And I also believe, Kath, that animals have been used in art to depict or acknowledge spirit. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect. Particularly you see that in Renaissance art, But for something like the Annunciation, where Gabriel comes and tells Mary that she's going to have the Holy Child, very often you'll find that there'll be a cat or a dog in the room that is looking at the angel, that can see the angel, that is reacting to that, because humans otherwise can't see this. The conversion of Paul or Saul on the road to Damascus, we get a horse in there. And if you actually go and read the Bible, it doesn't say he's riding to Damascus. He was definitely walking. But we put a horse in there because, once again, the horse can see the angel, can see the spirit, and can tell us that there is something miraculous going on. Those are two of my little favourite ones there, but there's lots and lots of other examples where the animals can see something that's going on that the humans in the painting can't.
Yeah, well, as they say, life imitates art, I believe. Well, that's certainly true because, yes, animals usually see spirit much, much more clearly than we do. And, I often joke about one of mine being a spookometer because Anya reacts so much more and so much more quickly to spirit in the house or wherever we are than I do. I certainly don't pick up on it like he does. Now, tell me what you've done in regards to your book with the National Library of Australia. What are you doing with that, or what have you done with that? Because I believe that's just been published. Am I right?
That's right. That one just came out in May. It's called Australia's Dogs, and it's really a lot of fun because what I was able to do was to really dig deeply into the National Library's collection of historic photographs and look at dogs in our society from the beginning of photography in Australia, so from the late 1800s right through to the present day. Again, looking at that human-animal bond, lots of pictures of just lovely doggos, dingoes, of course, but what interested me there, and I came into the National Library collection looking at paintings first of all and went down this massive rabbit hole when I realised what a fabulous collection of photographs they had. So you can look at the history of Australia through the eyes of dog ownership. But the really lovely thing for me is those early pictures where not everyone had a camera or, only cameras in professional studios. So you had to pay quite a bit of money to go down and have your portrait done. And the number of people who chose to take their dogs and have them included in that very special, very expensive picture just spoke volumes to me about the importance of dogs in early Australian life. And then when we get people getting, the Kodak box brownie and starting to take snapshots, the number of dogs that were just part of family life, all the lovely breeds and the lovely bitses. Gee, we love crossbred dogs in Australia. They've been there from the very beginning. And seeing those pictures, I think particularly, back in the day when you couldn't actually just erase it from your phone when you took a bad picture, you had to wait, take it down to the chemist, see how those pictures developed, and then you threw out the bad ones. The number of bad ones that didn't get thrown out because the dog was in it is really, really interesting, and that just speaks volumes to me about dogs in Australian life. So this is a lovely book. I'm quite delighted with it. Text by me, but, you could just about get it just for the pictures, really, because that's what this one's all about.
Yeah, the human-animal bond, it really hasn't changed that much. And, particularly I think people can relate these days because a lot of those people, particularly in country areas, really were very isolated, and a lot of them would have relied on their pet dogs in the same way people relied on their animals during COVID. Essentially different reasons, but you were still very isolated, and your animals became one of your main companions. Now, speaking of companions, tell me about the gorgeous Hogarth the Wolfhound. How did he come into being? And I'd like to learn a little bit more about him, please.
Okay, so Hogarth is the dog in my Alex Clayton Art Mystery series, and he's Alex's constant companion. He runs a bit of security too. He's also her confidant. But he came about because, first of all, she's a bit of a loner, so she needed to have someone there. And I wanted her to have a dog. And for those of us who have dogs, I have big doggos myself, but you kind of have that idea of what breed goes with what person. And for me, shaping the character of Alex Clayton, if I'd given her a golden retriever, for example, for my readers, I think she would have come across as a very different person. Or if she'd had a small, like a little doggo that she could stick in her handbag when she went to the art gallery, you would have a very different feeling about the sort of person that she was. So to give her a big doggo, and a dog like an Irish wolfhound who, can look a little bit intimidating at first, but when you get to know them, they're just kind of big cuddle bugs. That's kind of what she is too. Not so much the cuddle bug, but she's standoffish at first, but when you get to know her, once you're in her circle, she's your friend for life. So the dog is, in this regard, is kind of a foil for her personality and gives you a way into her character. But he's also important as a character in his own right in these books because, as many of us do, Alex talks to her dog. He, gives her the eye roll and the heavy sigh that we're all familiar with as dog people. And so that's sort of a little bit of comic relief within the book too. So that's where Hogarth comes into the whole thing. And I have to tell you about his name because that's relevant too. Hogarth was an artist. William Hogarth, a British artist. He actually owned pugs, I have to say. So there's a whole thing about Hogarth and his pugs and the pugs that he painted. But this dog needed an artistic name, obviously, because Alex is an art dealer. But one of the things Hogarth did was he did a series of etchings called The 4 Stages of Cruelty. And this is relevant for writing crime fiction. The first one shows a young boy being cruel to an animal. And by the time you get through to the 4th etching in this series, he has committed murder and he is being hanged. So it's this really nice little tie back into the art world and to crime writing for the dog to be named Hogarth.
As we say, some things never change. I mean, they were in the late 1700s, so we can really see human nature doesn't change, and it's exactly the same now, unfortunately. But there you go. I actually didn't know about Hogarth's name either. Can you tell me about the Labrador in Seven Sisters? Because I noticed there's a lab there, and yet none of the Seven Sisters own dogs, or any animals for that matter, I think, by memory.
Well, the dog in Seven Sisters he's kind of important because this is a very different sort of book. So the Alex Clayton books are perhaps more cosy crime. But Seven Sisters is, well, it's been described as a vigilante justice revenge thriller. So make of that what you will. But I really wanted the dog there for 2 reasons. First of all, part of this book, or the background for this book, is domestic violence. And we all know that animals are so often victims in this too, whether they've been physically injured or whether it's just the emotional fallout or whether, in fact, it is the animal that is preventing a woman from being able to get out of a domestic violence situation. What's she going to do with her animal? Where is she going to go? So I wanted there to be a dog in this book for that angle. But the other thing is that what's just happened in the book, and this is a slight spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you, the woman in question has just killed a man and now she's got to figure out how to rescue the dog. So what it gave me a chance to do was to give her humanity, was to make her a softer character and a more sympathetic character, and to get the reader more on her side because, it's an interesting thing and she has a wobble, she has a mental wobble. I've just killed a man and now I'm rescuing the dog. What's wrong with me? And I don't know if there's anything wrong with her personally, but hey, that's me and I get to write that book. So that's the interesting thing about having the dog in there, I think. And it also really matters from that domestic violence point of view that we think about the whole family, not just the humans, obviously women and children most important, but we've got to think of the animals in these situations too.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's still something that I know I used to see a lot of vet nursing, and even as an animal communicator, it's not that uncommon. You'll even hear it in the streets when you hear people yelling and stuff, and you'll hear the dog out the back if it's lucky, and it'll be barking or howling because it's distressed. I know there are some shelters that take animals for women or men, if for that matter, that are trying to escape domestic violence, and at least it gives the dogs somewhere to go and the people somewhere to get out. But unfortunately, my guess is, particularly in Victoria, funding will be cut for that, as pretty much well as everything else right now. So what are your plans moving forward, apart from being the unicorn's fairy godmother? What else is in the works for you, Kath?
Well, there is another Alex Clayton mystery in the works, more work for Hogarth.
which has been really fun to write. I've also got another character that I'm playing around with. We're off on a bit of a road trip around Australia. I don't think that there are any dogs in this one, which is interesting. So we'll see how that goes. And I've got a couple of characters sitting in the back of my head who are, making a bit of noise, and I'm going to have to deal with. And now you've reminded me about polar bears. I think there's got to be more polar bears somewhere around, doesn't there? There's just, it's in my head now, Caroline. What am I going to do? It's going to be a polar bear mystery.
Yeah, it's always all my fault, isn't it? And I'm fortunate I get to read them all before Kath publishes them. You'll have to take a trip to the Arctic, that's definitely, or Antarctica. Vikings, I wonder, anything to do with polar bears, because Vikings seem to be fairly popular at the moment. Maybe you can do Vikings and polar bears, I don't know.
Well, if we're talking polar bears, it's definitely got to be the Arctic for starters. But yeah, I reckon we can probably get some Vikings, polar bears, longboats kind of stuff going on. Horned helmets, lots of, kind of sounds. How does that work for you?
Works well. Viking true crime, or the Viking equivalent of Miss Marple. Would it be Mr. Marple? I guess we'll find out. I'll certainly let you know, everybody, when Kath does come out with her Viking sleuth book. It'll be fun. So want to thank Kath very much today for coming on the podcast and discussing animals in various aspects of art. I will put in the notes references and probably the covers, I think, if I can get copies of all of them, of her books. If you haven't read them, fabulous. And if you read The Schoolgirl Strangler, I can promise you, after the judge's comment, you'll never look at an axe in the same way again.
Thanks so much for having me on the podcast, Caroline. I am going to have to talk to my publisher about the Viking sleuth thing before we go down that particular rabbit hole. But it's been an absolute blast. We've covered some crazy topics. I've had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Talking with the Animals. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Feel free to look up Kath's books. They really are worth reading. If there's any topics you'd like me to cover, please drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay safe, and when you can, remember to talk with the animals.
Thank you for listening to Talking with the Animals. To learn more about Caroline and the services she provides, visit caroline-pope.com. You can also find her on Facebook at Caroline Pope Animal Communicator, CST, and NES Therapy. Are you ready to change the way you see your world and the animals in it? Well, we know his answer. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.